this question of the day. I was thinking about it for a while, but I thought about, you know what, what do you guys think about these YouTube tutorials that you find on game development? Are they accurate to follow, or are they just kind of like, throwing stuff? I just do a little block, yeah, which is good. You can do a little bit of block encoding. I think that's perfect. Do you often find like YouTube tutorials? Yeah, they're a big help. I think we were talking about that too on Discord. Some of you guys mentioned, and you guys had good opinions about it. The problem with those YouTube tutorials is sometimes they just tell you, okay, just here's the code, just copy and paste it. And then some people will kind of like go line by line and then show you how to do it. Brackeys does some sort of process like that where they show you, this is how you can code this sort of feature. For example, they'll show you how to like maybe move the player, for example. Right, typical move the player, right? You can move the player for many ways, and one of them it's this way, right? You can move the player through an easy, where is it? Transform position dot vector 3 move towards, something like that. You can do that too as well. I think usually the tutorials will mention that sort of process where you can do like a transform position. Now, the only thing I have issues with these YouTube tutorials is there's many ways of moving the player from around in a different area. But I don't want to be a lot because I don't want to be a tutorial hell. Exactly, which is kind of like links to tutorial hell, which is kind of like what I'm going into. I think when you follow these, and actually I think you should for sure, once you check out these tutorials, you just see what do they do? What is a transform position? What does it do? What's a vector 3 move towards? What exactly is it doing? So then that way you have like a general idea and you're not stuck in tutorial hell once you have the general understanding what the coding does, right? For example, for movements, transform position, vector 3 that move towards, it's a great position, right? Because you can use the position for the player, right? And then the targeted position, in this case, could be the whatever you want it to move towards. And then you can add it to the speed and then the time that delta frame. That's a typical easy way of moving. However, there's many other ways of moving. The bad side of doing this, which I actually just learned myself too, is that if you're colliding with certain materials or objects, you're gonna have that little relay kind of like effect happening. I don't know if you tried doing this, right? If you do like an obstacle, it kind of like jumps over the obstacle when you do a transform position because it's not using rigid body. So there's another way of doing this, which is of course using the rigid body. And this is what I mean by rigid body. So for example, on this zombie here, how I coded it, this is just an example. Instead of using the transform position, I went from a vector 3, right, a velocity with rigid body. So that way I'm using the target position, I'm getting the vector 3, and then I'm using the velocity instead. What that does is it tells the game object to move with rigid body. Once you do that, then you won't have any trouble with collisions. It won't like kind of pass through walls. It won't kind of like jump over obstacles, right? That's another way of moving about. And then usually tutorials don't show you this. They don't tell you, oh, by the way, you can use, rigid body to move as well. You can use velocity, you can use add force. Not too many people know about those sort of features that are in Unity because usually the tutorials don't tell you about it. And I think that there's many ways of going about doing different things, particularly like for player movement as well, right? I have my player movement. And the way I have it set up is also through rigid body. Alright, we can do the rigid body by velocity, which I love doing. I love doing velocity. Right, you can do the velocity and then that way you can do gravity that's already built in. Now you can also build in your gravity, right? You can also do that sort of feature. And this is what I mean. There's many ways of going about moving, right? Doing different things. This is just kind of like a primary example. Now, if you want to get more advanced, you can also do this sort of feature. And this is what I mean by it gets very complex and you need to have a general understanding how to code, why certain things do this, and get very familiar with what game engine you're using, or if you're using your own game engine, get familiar with what kind of code you want to use. So here's another good example. The double boss I'm working on I am not using rigid body. I'm not using transform position, or what is the other one? Transform translate, which I don't like. I don't like transform translate, but it works, right? But it doesn't work as well as you want. The one way I'm using is I'm using nav mesh. So nav mesh is the navigation system. What this does is it tells me go to look for this target. In this case, the target is the player, and move around obstacles. So I like this sort of position because you can do this with your, for example, your enemy. All right, you can go to view AI navigation, and you can set obstacles. For example, I want my devil boss here to avoid these spikes, and I can have it avoid these boxes too as well. I need to put them in and avoid these sort of obstacles around here, and I can do that with nav mesh agent, which normally you can't do with velocity, because what ends up happening is the enemy gets stuck on these, so it doesn't go around here, right? It doesn't kind of like try to move around that area. And then this is an example of using AI. All right, how is this helpful? This will help you in a way so that way you don't have to code this whole process in. And this is what I mean by tools, AI tools that you can use. Normally, like if you would follow a Brackeys tutorial, for example, right, it tells you, oh, just use transform position and you're set, and vector 3 dot, move towards. That's it, right? But that's a simple unit, right? That's like using like a simple thing on a free kind of like a open area when there's no obstacles. But if you get more complex and you have obstacles, you don't want your enemy to get stuck on these like spikes or boxes or whatever it may be. You want it to go around. You want it to be smart. You want it to take stairs, or you want it to go downstairs. That sort of feature you want to include. Spiky? Very spiky, yes. It's very spiky. We want to avoid spiky, right? We don't want to get hit by spiky. We want to avoid it. And I think it's really important to know the tools, understand like how do they work, right? So then that way you can say, oh yeah, that's right. I don't have to use velocity, or I don't have to use transform position. I can use nav mesh, for example. AI nav mesh that's already built into Unity. And those are examples of, knowing your tools, like understanding what kind of code you need to implement and how to do it. And that way you will get out of tutorial hell. You don't have to worry about using any more Unity or I guess the YouTube tutorials. Right at the beginning, it's good, right? You follow maybe a Brackeys tutorial, maybe you're using Godot, right? Now he's doing Godot stuff. You can follow those tutorials along, but I would suggest anybody that's doing those tutorials, read them, like understand them, but don't just copy and paste it in. I really understand what it means to do like a, transform translate. What is an animator? What is a method, for example? What are these public void? This sort of thing. Why is it void? Right? That sort of, what is an if condition? What's a boolean? Right? What's a proper way of coding things around? What's a public static, right? Why do a private? I've seen a lot of people still use public for their variables. You'll see them. I've seen tons of streamers or, new game developers. They don't use private. They use everything public, right? And I say, hey, you can benefit using a private variable. And say, no, that's. And usually the response I get is, oh no, that's the way I was taught to do it. And then when you ask them, but why though? What do you think that is? Is there another beneficial way of doing it? And then that way you don't have to, for one, struggle, two, have a broken game, for example, or have an issue with your code, or just say, oh well, it's just the way the game is, right? You can learn different new tools and make the process much easier on yourself. So that way you can have a better understanding. And also in case of, someone questions you, say you want to get like a game development career or job, right? Maybe your employer will say, well, we need this to be in nav mesh. So now what's a nav mesh, right? What is that? What's AI nav mesh? Oh, just I thought you knew about Unity. Oh no, I had no idea about that. Oh, that sort of things you need to know about. The more you know, the better it is for you, the easier your work is. And that way you can get a beneficial one for, you can have a beneficial job if you want to get a career in game development. and two, you can have like an easier time doing coding and doing sort of game designs, that sort of process. Yeah, I think that's the best option you can use for that. But yeah, all right, enough about me. Hopefully that was good enough. So next time you watch a YouTube tutorial, think of what Mick said. Make sure you don't just copy and paste the code that you just given. Slowly understand why is it that they're using the feature that they're doing. Change things around, modify it to the way that you do your code, and then you have your own sort of like process in there where you're saying, well, I know Brackeys did this, or I know Blackthorn Prod did this, or I know whoever it may be did this, but I'm gonna change things around. I'm gonna make it a little bit more beneficial. Alright? And yeah, that's a nice way of getting out of tutorial hell, and a nice way of learning things and doing different things. That way you don't have to depend on too much tutorials. Alright, and be open to change. Alright, that's good.